Got it. Okay, we've got 2 minutes. Hit the setup and everything. Aaron, we're probably just going to go Bryan. You hear me, Aaron? We're just going to go Bryan and then 2 questions. So load up camera. Wait, put camera right. Welcome everyone to another Applied Information live stream, and today it's actually quite a cool topic. We've been waiting for this for quite some time, and we want to talk about the FCC Waiver ruling. And this is just a key, almost a pivotal change in our industry. It's myself here with Bryan Mulligan, who's the president, CTO of Applied Information, and also Nima from the Nima hat as well. And I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. One thing I do want to ask everybody here, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That obviously provides a lot more information to other people out there. And then during the show, if you can write any comments and questions on YouTube, that'll allow us to answer some of these questions while everything's happening. So without much ado, I'm going to hand over to Bryan Mulligan. Just to actually, before we go into it, can you explain a little bit of your background in connected vehicle technology and sort of why you're one of the experts in this area?
Thanks, Peter, and welcome everybody. Being an expert is probably overstating my ability, but nonetheless, I've been working at this connected vehicle problem for many, many years as a technology provider in surface transportation. And what we've been doing is struggling to get in the transportation space to get connected vehicles deployed. And now there is a new move afoot to finally break this this problem. And that's what we're going to talk today. Is that the FCC waiver order, which was issued last week, very powerful step in this process. And that's going to be the topic of what that means at a practical level. And so look forward to taking you through our perspective of how does this accelerate the deployment of connected vehicles and this life-saving technology, and how do we get it done forthwith.
But why is this so significant, in terms of this waiver? And talk us through the steps before the waiver. In other words, what's happened up until now?
What we're going to try and do is explain what's happened in simple terms. If you've got a very complicated problem, the key thing to resolving a complicated problem is to break it up into a series of simpler problems. And if they're still too complicated, break them up some more. So what I'm going to do is break this up into 3 sections, and we can deal with each one in turn. The first one is the business issue of getting connected vehicles deployed, and what this means in terms of getting the private sector going with manufacturing devices and car companies and so forth. And really, that's the crux of getting connected vehicles deployed, is to focus on the business issues, because for 20 years we've focused on the technical radio wars, as I call them, and that didn't get us there. So I'm going to talk about the business issues. The second thing, there are some technical issues in the waiver order and what those mean. And then the third topic is there grains of sand and risks and so forth that are part of the deployment in this journey. And I can talk about those at any level of detail that anybody wants to talk about. But I'm not going to start with that, because that's what we've typically done in the past, is focused on, oh yes, but what about this and what aboutism and the spectrum and this and that and the next thing. And then we took ourselves, and in fact there was a topic raised by Continental in the waiver about intellectual property rights. We can't possibly deploy this waiver while the intellectual property rights are potentially unresolved. And so those are what I call grains of sand, and they're important to various people, and we'll deal with them at any level of detail. But it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the business landscape that's been established to successfully get connected vehicles deployed on the basis of this FCC waiver order, which has been granted to ourselves, some states, and some auto companies to go ahead with the deployment of connected vehicles using cellular V2X while the final rules are being adopted. So we can deal with it each in those.
I think that's a great way of breaking it up, Bryan. And I mean, I'd love to actually start with the first one, because for a private company like ourselves, and for companies like Audi and Ford, what does this give to them? Because for us, we've said, finally the ruling has happened. We can continue development on all of this technology, and I believe it's probably the same thing with the car companies. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, I'm not going to speak for the car companies, but what I will do is speak for ourselves, and we might be a little micro example of many, many companies. So we had a whole development program lined up, which we withheld the capital from that program because we didn't have spectrum. We've done a lot of work with experimental licenses and getting product deployed out in the field and proving it will work, and focusing on applications and all the things we do. But there wasn't the ability to deploy nationwide. That changed with the waiver, and I'll deal with that specifically as I split up the auto companies, the states, and the owner operators of roadways, and then technology companies like ourselves. They were dealt with separately in the waiver, so I'll deal with each of those in turn. But the huge thing is this, is that auto companies have been granted the right to deploy cellular V2X in vehicles nationwide, subject to some technical limitations. I'll talk about those, but there is no geographic restriction on where the 3 auto companies named in the waiver, Ford, Audi, and Jaguar Land Rover, where they can deploy. And that's huge, because that provides the confidence that they can proceed with deployment, and they're subject to figuring out the applications and so forth. We'll talk about that a bit later. The business case of who is responsible for arbitrating between legacy DSR systems, as in the order it was the FCC just plainly said, with the DSRC systems which are scarcely deployed, that responsibility has been given to the states, and the two states, Utah and Virginia, who are named in the order, have the responsibility for reconciling any interference between legacy DSRC and CV2X. And why that was so powerful, in my view, was that it established that there's not going to be a lawsuit by the states suing some other party, say, oh, you've messed up my DSRC. That's been given, that's responsibility for ensuring an orderly transition, as they put it, from DSRC to CV2X is the responsibility of the state departments of transportation. And then the third thing is private sector companies, technology companies like ourselves and others, named in the order, have been given permission to develop and certify product for sale in the market. And that is the single, those three things together are the established a framework, certainly for applied information and us as a private sector company, to spend our own capital in releasing a set of cellular V2X products in the market that are really just going to be very powerful and effectively and inexpensively put this life-saving technology into the infrastructure as an ordinary course of business.
Okay, but what does that mean for, I'm a city or DOT and I want to actually deploy CV2X now? What does that mean? I mean, from their perspective, do they feel more comfortable now deploying it? And what's the process for them to go through? I'll speak to you that as a business person, not as a lawyer. So I'm a business person, I'm not a lawyer. And so what it is the door has been opened for us all to drive a bus through it. And what that means is that the FCC, I thought, wrote an exceptionally well-worded order. And what they said is that technical limitations are this, and this. I would get into that. And it's slightly less than even in the first rule and order that they placed. The power, there's some restrictions on the power, there's some restrictions on the spectrum. But that was what the waiver applicants, including ourselves, did, to say, let's not argue about the finesse right at the edge of what people can and can't do. Let's get some spectrum allocated and power allocated that would work well enough to get this deployed. The FCC said, high five, off you go. Show us that you're going to do this and use it and so forth. And what that means is that that we can then get a move on with deploying these technologies, but the framework has established. So I just want to tell you, it's a step in the process. There are 3 steps in the process. As I said, break any complicated problem into a series of smaller problems. How we break it up is as follows. The first one is the conditions have been established under which you get a waiver. It's been established that there will be a final set of rules, 18 to 24 months probably, which are going to be the Bible under which cellular V2X, where every I is dotted and T is crossed, there'll be a user comment period, a public comment period, and so forth. That's the step in the middle is that's been established that there's process for what we, the 5GAA and other folks call Me Too waivers. So it's been established that there's a waiver process for other cities and states to apply for the same waiver to permit deploy in geographic locations under the same conditions as this waiver has been granted. So if I'm Texas DOT or Maine DOT or whatever, and I want to get on that same waiver, yes, what do I actually need to do?
What you need to do is apply for the waiver. And what we're going to do is help you. That's one of the things we do as a business, is help people. There's no obligation or so forth. The 5GAA and the US sections in that have established a a template of how to apply for a waiver. There's a set of instructions about how to fill it in. And then there's a place in the FCC waiver application process where you actually file that waiver. And provided you, provided that you don't try and change the rules and say, well, I don't want a waiver under those conditions, I want it under my own conditions. Well, don't do that, because this waiver quite strongly indicated that the waiver is granted under these conditions, and it's not granted if you want to change the rules or relitigate DSRC or relitigate the spectrum allocation and so forth. That's just not going to happen under this waiver. So what we're going to do is have a waiver that's under these conditions, and I certainly strongly suggest that all the folks who want to deploy CSRC radius in the infrastructure just apply for waivers, and they're going to be processed by the FCC in due course.
Okay, and just so that people know that what we've done is, together with 5GAA and all the rest, there is a process of requesting a waiver. And as Bryan said, if you guys want to reach out to us and ask for some help, we've got documentation that we can share that allows you to enter in exactly the same way that all of these other waivers were granted, so that you are able to get access to the waiver. So reach out to us. We'll help you with this as we go through it. Bryan, I had another question, which is there's maybe 15 or 20 cities, DOTs that have experimental licenses for the to deploy CD2X. What does that mean for them right now?
The short answer is nothing, but I'll explain that a little bit better. There was nothing in the waiver or in the first order talking about experimental license. The experimental licenses from the FCC is this process under which areas and technology companies like ourselves can deploy equipment to test it all out and prove it all out. That's the experimental license process. So the experimental licenses that we have and that the states have and whoever has them remain. The limitation for experimental licenses was twofold. And again, it's split any big problem into a series of smaller problems. The twofold, that there was no real possibility of having experimental licenses for the car companies on a national basis. Experimental licenses just don't work like that. They're not. It's not a mechanism of having a backdoor widespread deployment. So that was a huge problem for the car companies, that they couldn't have widespread deployment under experimental licenses. And then the second aspect is that there was limitations on the commercial nature of transactions for experimental licenses, because we had to retain the right and the capability to turn off the radios when we were granted an experimental license if that experimental license was revoked. So the folks that we're working with that have experimental licenses carry on. It's business as usual. The experimental license process is still available. It hasn't been rescinded or anything like that. But really the focus now is getting waivers so that we can do commercial deployments at scale under this waiver process.
So I think the other thing, just for anyone that has an experimental license with applied information, reach out to us. We're going to be reaching out to you as well in terms of applying for the FCC waiver. So, whoever's got an experimental license will convert you over to the waiver. And that's going to be a pretty straightforward, simple process, as you saw in that documentation.
It's just a form to fill in, yeah.
It's a form to fill in. And because they've granted it to others on that basis, we've now got the precedence.
Yes, I don't want to speak for the FCC, but nonetheless, it's been clear that under these conditions, the deployment of FCC, the deployment of cellular D2X by the FCC is permitted. And yes, there's lots of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed and so forth. But the DSRC is dead. In other words, over the last 5 years, there's been talk about turning left and turning right. The FCC in the waiver order said we are not relitigating all of that. They said this is the way it's going to be, and it's in the public interest. The FCC's order was written around what was in the public interest. And the public interest is CV2X, and to get this deployed, and the waiver was granted, understanding that I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed, but the waiver was granted because it's in the public interest to get connected vehicles deployed, and we wholeheartedly support that.
Okay. What was actually in the waiver on a technical point of view for what spectrum was provided? I know you mentioned that it was 20 megahertz instead of 30, and there were some other sort of restrictions on that. What were those sort of restrictions that came in there?
There's quite a straightforward. The waiver order is only 11 pages long, so it's actually quite easy reading. You just read it from top to bottom. It doesn't take very long. You'll read it all there. And so there were strict restrictions on three things. One is the frequency, and the applicants, ourselves included, only asked for 20 megahertz. That's why we're given 20 megahertz. We chose not to try and consume the whole 30 megahertz band because there was an edge condition of potentially interference at the edge between Wi-Fi and CV2X direct. And so collectively, we decided not to take that on in the first day. And so that will be resolved in the final order in 12 to 18 months' time. The second thing was the power output, and there was various. The power output is related to range. You get better range at higher power outputs, but you get a higher probability of interference, the way it bleeds off at the edges of the spectrum. And so the FCC gave a reasonable ruling on that to provide the power that would work well enough, but little short of some of the high-powered applications that some folks had been asking for. And then there were some restrictions on the antenna design and the height and so forth, but all quite manageable and all quite a nicely balanced set of things. Didn't give what everybody wanted, but it's a nicely balanced set that it would work well enough while we potentially explore what might be in the final route. And so one of the things I've got a couple of little show and tells, because people might actually not know actually what these radios actually look like. And so a CV2X radio looks like that. So I don't know, you can just flick over to the other camera, like that. So it's in focus. Something like that. But nonetheless, and so, we made the decision to put these CV2X radios on a pluggable board so we could change the radios and have a design that could accommodate future radios and so forth. But it's really a software-driven radio. It's a little, some people think of radios having transistors and tubes and things like that. No, this is actually just a little microprocessor-driven radio that operates at that 5.9 gigahertz with various spectrum and various rules and so forth. And so all of these radio has over their software update capabilities. So that's why we are confident we're not at risk. If some little grain of sand emerges about the frequency of the channels or things like that, or the power, that's all software controllable. And that's the big thing that gave us the confidence to proceed in commercial deployment, because the genie's out the bottle. We're not going back to relitigating what kind of radio it is or the broad sense of what spectrum it is and so forth. The genie is out the bottle. And because these are software-driven radios with over-the-air software update capability, we certainly feel that we can confidently deploy and confidently lead with the infrastructure. There's an interesting thing. In fact, I was at ITS America last week and speaking on the NEMA panel with Ford and Audi and Qualcomm and Unix and myself. And the guy from Ford said quite clearly, he said, and there's a lot of discussion in connected vehicle circles. Well, there's a chicken and the egg. Why should we deploy the infrastructure when there are no cars? Why should we deploy the cars when there's nothing to talk to? That's the chicken and egg situation. But he said, from his perspective, that it was quite clear. The chicken was the infrastructure. The infrastructure goes first, because then there's something for the cars to talk to on the first day. So let's not agonize about it. The car companies are not going to lead this on the basis that one day cars will talk to each other. It's our responsibility as infrastructure guys to go first and blanket the infrastructure with inexpensive, effective radios that deliver applications on the first day. And now there's a competitive reason for the car companies to have it, because my car doesn't talk to that school beacon or that school bus or that intersection, and somebody else has done. Well, that's a competitive advantage, and that's the way the cars will do it. So that's why we're committed to, and the word, I choose those words carefully, inexpensive, effective radios that can be deployed in the existing infrastructure.
And I think, on that point, which is quite interesting, it came from, I think Jim Meisner mentioned this to me, and actually just the math behind it. If you go and deploy 10% of all the vehicles with connected vehicle technology, you have a 1% chance of your vehicle coming across another vehicle to do it. If you have infrastructure and you have a connected vehicle car, it will be able to talk to that infrastructure 100% of the time.
Yeah, correct.
So that's just a key
thing.
So
time's almost up. I don't know. Are there any questions there?
Yeah, I think please, guys, if you got any questions, put it in the chat of the YouTube site. Chat out any of the questions. We'd love to go into any of the questions that you have there. I did have we talked about DSRC and CV2X. Effectively, with all of these new rules that have come in, the FCC has chosen CV2X over DSRC. So the new radios that are going out there are CV2X radios.
That is correct. CV2X radios, just for completeness, consist of two components. There's the network radio and the line of sight direct radio, so-called UU and PC5. The order covers the direct radios. The network radios, the cellular network, that's covered by all the other cellular network things. That's not part of this order.
That's using existing spectrum. Right?
That's correct. And existing providers and so forth. But our initial testing showed that the direct radios are so powerful because it doesn't need an interposing entity, a network operator, edge service provider, whatever the case may be. The radios just talk from the infrastructure to the cars. And when we did the work with the audience in some of the projects that we did, our engineers and their engineers got the radios all talking on the first morning. And then we were delivering applications. And so then it's how far away should the vehicle stop, or should it go beep, beep, or bop, bop, and so forth. And so the cellular V2X radios direct is a simple way for infrastructure and cars to communicate. And that is why it's so powerful. And our challenge is, as infrastructure technology guys, is to make it inexpensive and easy to deploy, as well as deal with all the risks of security and things like that, which is the topic of separate webinars. We'll deal with those.
So, question to you. If we don't have questions at the moment, but question to you is, so a lot of people on this call are the first time they're on the call with us. What is behind us, and what's the significance of what is behind us?
What you're seeing here behind us is called the Infrastructure Automotive Technology Laboratory. It's a private sector initiative to make the effective use of connected vehicles through having the whole of the America's infrastructure, the North American infrastructure, available to folks for testing right here and in the streets of Alpharetta, where we're living. So we call it going and playing in the traffic. We've got a very cooperative city who embraces technology and embraces change. And so it stood up as the IATL, as the IATL Partner Alliance, which is a non-binding agreement that we're all going to agree to work together to solve this problem of 40,000 people a year dying on the roads. And that's proved to be a very effective way of getting the stuff practically deployed. And the folks who've done projects here have seen how effective it is to actually get this rung out so that we can demonstrate the applications. We did, for those of you who follow our YouTube channel, we did a very effective presentation or demonstration with the 5GAA, where we brought the world to Alpharetta. And what happened is that we drove around and showed folks the radios, talking to the infrastructure, giving paramedics green lights, getting signal phase and timing, red light running, school beacons, school buses, you name it, the whole gamut of applications that are life-changing and will help make a safer environment.
Okay, we've got a good question here from Jeff. My agency is brand new with deployment. I'm hearing you suggest applying for a waiver, or rather an experimental license. Is that correct?
And it depends on your time scales. Certainly apply for the waiver straight away. We'll help you with that. Put it in. Then it's done. If your timescales are, you want to deploy this in a month or 2 months or 3 months, then probably an experimental license as well. It's not either or, but if you're just getting going, get your waiver in and let's see what happens. We'll help you with that.
Yeah, because I mean we've had great success with the experimental
Sure.
licenses, and we've never had one denied. So it's very easy, very simple process to put in an experimental license. So you can actually apply for an experimental license and go with the waiver.
But I just want to make sure that everybody understands. An experimental license is for experimental license purposes. So if you want to do a corridor so you can test it out and see what it's like, that's what an experimental license is for, so you can test it works in your environment. If you want to do wide-scale deployment, then the waiver is the way to go, because that's a waiver within the geographic parameters of whoever it is that's applying for the waiver.
But yeah, just reach out to us and we'll provide that information. Any other questions at the moment? I see something from Brent just saying the frequencies 5.905 to 5.925 with a maximum. And actually, I'll pull up the waiver over here, information, in a second. Let me just grab it over here and go back to my screen here. You'll see these are the, it is 5.905 to 5.925, which is the 20 megahertz. And then the OBU limits are 20 decibels. The output power, the RSU is 33 decibels. Just
Slightly different because that's EIRP, which is the same as the OBU. Just also, you can bring that back. The restriction of the height is or the angle is actually for OBUs, if you read that literally. But there are some restrictions on RSUs, the height of the RSUs and so forth in the original order. Let us help you with that to get it right, because that's actually those parameters as written there for the OBU, the onboard units, because we always speak in alphabet soup. OBU is onboard unit and RSU is roadside units. But what we'll do is we'll certainly do the same parameters as were in the original waiver request. I don't have those to hand, but what that does, it means that you get approved in the same way that the original waiver was approved.
Nicholas, has got a question. We've got a few intersections with FMUs running SPAT. Do you need to get a waiver? The answer is if you're just running signal phasing and timing over the cell network using the Travel Safely app, the answer is no. If you're using the CV2X, on all of our deployments, we've got experimental licenses at the moment where we've got CV2X. So the process would be we're going to reach out to the agencies that have experimental licenses to actually put them onto the waiver program as we speak. But generally speaking, if you're in Florida, the answer is no, you do not need to have a waiver on our FMUs that are deployed there, because they're actually running over the cell network, and that's the CV2X, as Bryan said, it's broken up into two forms of communication: CV2X direct, which is this 5.9 gigahertz, and then CV2X network, which is over the cell network, 4G, 5G networks. And if you're running over the 4G, 5G networks, it's already covered over the cellular spectrum that's already been granted. Great. Well, I don't want to take up too much time from everybody. Really appreciate your time. Please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to walk you through the process of getting a waiver. And I'm going to leave you guys with a short thing that we filmed. I cut off the beginning of it with the Audi and Jim Meisner from Qualcomm. And in this video, if any of you guys know Jim Meisner, I think it's the happiest I've ever seen him. So I'm going to play this for you and end off the session with that.
So I'm Brad Sturtz. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Audi and the co-chair of the 5GA U.S. Policy Task Force. So the FCC granting waiver request to occupy the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum, it's really a first crucial step to begin to deploy CV2X across the United States now. It frees us up as OEMs to begin to work with infrastructure owners and operators, work with other equipment manufacturers to really bring this to life. You know, there's a critical next step, which is to come up with the final rules and the report and order. But this is a huge opportunity and a huge moment for the ITS community.
My name is Jim Meisner. I work for Qualcomm in the Automotive Business Unit. I'm our Global V2X Ecosystem Lead. I'm also a 5GA board member, an ITS America board member, and of all things, an IEEE ITS Society Board of Governors person. So wearing all those hats, I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about my favorite topic. The joint waiver request is a sea change. And what it means is a sea change that goes toward the tidal wave of safety. So for us at Qualcomm, we're immensely grateful for the infrastructure owner-operators, the OEMs, all the waiver applicants, because they are part of this that precipitated this revolution in road safety. So we're pleased, in case you couldn't tell.
The FCC ruling was huge, partly because of its technical content, which was actually quite limited, but very precise. The whole waiver was only 11 pages long. The most important aspect of the waiver was for the business rulings that it contained. And so for those of us in the private sector, the three aspects of that which were huge were firstly, that the automotive companies that were named have license to deploy cellular V2X technology nationwide. So that removes the stumbling block for the car companies getting going. The second one was that it placed the responsibility and the onus on the states to resolve any difficulties between DSRC and cellular V2X, because the states were the original license holders for DSRC. So they know where they are and they know how that has to be resolved. And then the third thing, it implicitly granted permission for companies like Applied Information, and in fact Applied Information was named in the waiver as being one of the companies that's authorized to develop and certify this technology for use on the roadway and in the infrastructure. And so that is hugely powerful in unlocking the private sector investment that's going to be needed to deliver these applications forthwith, without delay.
So what it means for Audi is we're able to, this waiver request, we're able to work with different companies to come up with proof of concepts to really fine tune how this is going to operate in the US for our vehicles and for the infrastructure or other vehicles that will be equipped with C-V2X. So this gives us a lot more freedom to begin to make sure that everything's in place for the final rules.
It'll be a tidal wave. I don't think it'll be localized. It'll be, because safety is a pervasive problem. C-V2X is a solution that addresses many of the problem areas of safety. So whoever is safety conscious will look carefully and think about how to apply C-V2X sooner rather than later.